So welcome back. This is the second part, a shorter part of Zentangling for Sketchnoters. And in this part, we're going to make a second tile just to give us some practice. So let me get my camera going. Okay, so as I mentioned before, Zentangle and sketchnoting really do go together, even though the products are very different. It's a good warm-up because you practice making marks accurately and gracefully, deliberately, but also joyfully and playfully. Okay? And these are just different drawings that I've made. You can see that there are lots of different moods and styles. The tiles, the tools that you need are pretty much the same as the tools that you use for sketchnoting, something to draw on. And in this session, we're going to use a plain old index card. The qualities are that it has some substance to it. It is fairly small, and it can easily be rotated under my hand. Something to draw with, I'm going to use my pen that I use all the time, which is a Pilot G2.38 for my ink lines, for my tangle patterns. My pencil is an IKEA free pencil. My smudger is a Q-tip. And for my eraser, I'm going to use the erasing end of my standard pencil that I have with me all the time. It's not a great pencil for shading, but the eraser is nice and precise. Okay, so gather your tools, stop and get your tools together, and we will begin. And the pencil and the paper will be the first thing that we use. Remember that the first step in Zentangling is to be grateful for the time and the opportunity to take a little break and make a little something. And the first thing that you do is give yourself some corner dots. We don't always do this, but we will today. Sometimes there are floating tangles that you don't get a frame for, but especially when you're starting, it's nice to give yourself the corner dots. And the reason for this is that it conquers the fear of the blank page. I think sometimes in sketchnoting, we can put a date or decide on a title or a main idea. Okay. Then we add a frame. You can see it doesn't matter if those lines are straight or perfect. They're just a suggestion, and they're going to disappear pretty much in the finished work anyway, even if you don't erase them. Then the next step is a string. A string is, again, something that divides. It's just a guide, like these pencil lines. It's also a pencil line. It could be any shape at all, but I'm going to ask for this tile that we all use the same string, which is just a simple swath across there. Okay. So we set our pencil aside and take up our pen, and we're going to fill in this middle section first. And I'm going to further divide the middle section, and I'm going to divide it using a particular kind of sort of divider, this kind of organic shape. I'm going to put one on each side. You could use just straight edge, but I'm putting narrow little dividers, and I think I'm going to put two more, so I've got 3 sections. And these are roughly the same width, and they're roughly the same distance apart. Rough being the operational word. Okay. So the next pattern that we're going to do is a pattern called Shattuck, and it's just a series of lines one set going in one direction and then going in the other direction. They can be straight or they can be curved. I'm going to do mine curved. And they're roughly the same distance apart. And once you're going all the way across, then you stop and you go in the other direction. Okay, so those went this way, so these are going to go this way. So you can see that this is filling a sort of triangular or pizza pie shape. And then you can go back. And I'm going to keep going with the same number that I had. And this is an excellent demonstration of how it's just practice drawing lines accurately. Do it again. And I'm going to go in the same direction. And I'm actually looking across that mark to kind of get in the vicinity of that. And I am turning my tile so that my hand is really making the same motion over and over again on something that is roughly the same size. So what that means, I've got some uniformity of line. And that's a principle that you could certainly use in sketchnoting. Look how those lined up. Pretty good. That was accidental. One of the ways to get that kind of accuracy is just look at where you want the line to end up. Like if I want to end up right there, just keep mindful. Just keep your eye on that spot, and your hand will lots of times cooperate. You need to go in, especially since I'm using, this is a gel pen, not a felt tip. So that's the basic pattern for Shattuck. The next, we're going to do another grid pattern. But instead of doing the grid that lines up to this, it's going to be a rectangular grid. Let's do a grid that's sort of on the diagonal. So one way to pick a diagonal is to go to a corner and just draw a line. And again, let's do this a pretty generous grid. And it looks like I'm not intending, but to hit at a particular spot. And then I think I will end up being parallel to this, and I'm even going to, just for Rens, I'm going to echo that. Okay. So I've started a grid. It's not a perfect rectangle. It doesn't matter. Okay. And then, so that was the first move. The shape that I'm going to put into it is, maybe you can think of it as a grain of rice. And we're going to do that all the way around each cell. And you see that those curves just fit right into each other. And this is practice at making those marks. I mean, there are really only a few kinds of marks, right? There's a dot, right? There's a straight line. and it can be horizontal or vertical. And the way we handle that is by rotating the work, and also if it's a long straight line, using your whole hand. There are lines that have one curve in one direction or the same curve, and sometimes they're shallow and sometimes they're deep. Okay. There are curves that go in two directions. So practicing those, and there are circles or orbs. I learned in drafting to draw circles in two parts, but it works this way. But really, these 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 shapes are all you need to be able to do accurately to draw pretty much anything. Okay. So IXO, those are the kinds of marks. So these are shallow C-shaped marks. And you can do each space, or you can do several at a time. But you see that they just cozy up into each other in that really lovely way. And when you get to the edges, you can decide whether to finish them off tight or do like they are going off into the distance. And then here along the edge, you would just have one of them. You don't have to do that. Okay. And that's called bales. Bales, you can do a lot more things. You can put another set of circles. You can do things like crisscross across them. You could put a little circle in the middle of each one. You could alternate. There are lots and lots and lots of things that you can do with a grid structure. Let's see. Okay. And that's called bales. Now the last one in this, I'm going to choose a tangle that I'm extremely fond of. It's pretty magical. You see it right here. It's called Zentangle. I use it a lot, but it's also going to be used to show how you can use a crazy grid, or a web. So let's just take a line, kind of like what you did with Hollabaugh, and go across that region. I'm going to echo the edge, and then do another one at some angle. Do another one and crisscross until you've got, oh, I don't know, 10 or so, a few. Okay. And now we're going to squeeze a shape into each one of these parts of the web, like putting a balloon right in there. So we're going to start on a side and head toward a corner, but before we get there, we're going to take a turn and go to the other side. We're going to keep going. When we get close to the corner, we're going to take a turn and go to the other side. Now, this is a move that takes a while to get the hang of. Don't worry about it not being exactly right when you first start. I've done this a lot. In fact, having it be loose, especially when you're using a tool like a gel pen, isn't a bad thing. But you're just going to squeeze in shape in every one of these. Cutting the corners kind of short. Remember to breathe. And sometimes you might want to just do the corners and then come back and reinforce the section of the sidelines. Right? You could just cut the corners and then come around. And this is an excellent exercise in drawing deliberately and mastering your tool. Plus, you get this incredibly lovely, organic shape. And everyone's different. Pause the video while you finished that, which is called Zeppel. It's like Zeppelin, but kind of inside out. I'm going to go around and just give this a very rough outline for each one of them. Just go around it a few times. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay. So we finished with our tangling step. Then our next step is shading. And I'm going to show you different ways to shade Shattuck and Bales and Zeppel. So for Shattuck, one of the things that people often think of is that this is like overlapping stuff. So a way to indicate that is with a little bit of graphite. On that outboard edge of each of these sets. Okay? You can see that just adding that little bit, even before you smudge it, is very compelling. It really makes those things jump out, or makes those edges shift underneath the other one. Okay. So I'm just adding a little graphite to each one of the, whatever's darker goes behind. Now, the other thing that we might do is make these columns look a little more round. So we can do that by making the sides a little dark. And I am actually putting it right along this so that I get some on the column to sort of represent the falling away, and some on the shadow shapes to be a shadow on the shadow. And this time we're shading with a Q-tip. So I'm going to shade these columns, and here we're just softening it. Now the index card isn't fine watercolor paper, so it doesn't respond in the same way as watercolor paper does, right? But it responds. I'm going to do all the columns, and I'm trying to keep a little bit of space in the middle clear. Kind of tricksy with a Q-tip, but it's working. If you didn't have a Q-tip, a rolled up bit of paper towel or napkin would do. And then we're just going to soften each of these just real quick. Doesn't have to be fancy, then not a lot of pressure. Just dig in a little bit in the little corners there. Okay. I mean, look at that. Look at that. Just look at it. Okay. Now, bales, you could do a lot of different ways, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to put a little bit of graphite. Again, I'm holding it at a low angle. I'm going to put graphite at each one of these flowery looking intersections. So I'm just putting a little graphite in each one of those. Pretty much a circle. But again, it's just a soft hint. And then I'm just using my smudger to soften that, and I'm actually moving it a little bit along those flowers. I can see right now I would probably want a little bit more, so I'm going to come back in with a little more graphite, a little more pressure, darken that up in the middle. Okay. That added a fair amount of stuff. And then for our balloons, we're going to put a fair amount of graphite. I think the IKEA pencil is probably a little bit harder than the Zentangle pencil is. You want something that's at least a number 2, or what's called HB, or maybe number 2 is 2H. Yeah, this is probably 2H. A softer pencil is going to give you more graphite than a harder one. And the index card surface is pretty smooth. It doesn't have the tooth that watercolor paper does. But I mean, just look at that. Just look at that. And you can see that I went around a few times and gave my line a very different character. Okay. And now I'm going to just soften that graphite in each one of those spots in between. You see that it's starting to get into the bubbles or the pebbles. And then I'm going to go around the outside, sort of around the perimeter of these, and just give a little more graphite. And again, I'm going to go back in and add some more graphite so that I can move it around. Yeah, the IKEA pencil is pretty hard. But you can see that what the smudging does is it gives you just a soft variation. One of my favorite things to do with this, I don't know if you'll, is to take a sharp pencil. I could use the tip of the IKEA pencil, and just scribble. Just scribble around on these. It makes it look so much more like pebbles. Now, if you're wanting it to look more like bubbles, don't do this. That's a different technique. But I just love how this looks. And I'm not thinking about it very much. Softening anything that might be there. And if I wanted to give a little highlight, if I've got it all smeared out, I can give a little eraser highlight in the middle of each one. Okay. So this is another tile, another three patterns: Shattuck, Bales, and Zentangle. And you can see that there are an infinite variety. If we combine these with the four patterns that we had before, you can see all kinds of possibilities. You see the similarity of bales and floors. You could imagine putting Shattuck along the planks of Hollabaugh. You could, it just goes on and on and on. So again, I commend this technique, this practice to you as a sketchnoter. It's excellent practice at making marks. It gives you some handy techniques for shadowing and bringing things to different layers. And when practiced in the way that Maria and Rick intended as a meditative practice, it allows your subconscious access to actually do work in the brain. So the final step, the penultimate step is to initial and sign. So let's find that pen again. Since these look like rocks, I'm going to let them be on the bottom. But let's see, today's the 12th of March, 2023. Intro to Zentangle. or verbal to visual. And now we can appreciate. Now we can appreciate. I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I trust you have found something. I hope you found something that you can enjoy and that you can practice with. And maybe we'll have some tangling sessions in verbal to visual. See you on the next one.